Bikers mess with fat bald man, not knowing he's a gang leader. Marcus Kane looked like any other father trying to balance family obligations and life's everyday struggles. He was fat, bald, and wore comfortable clothes that didn't quite hide his big belly. Most people saw him as an unremarkable man who drove a sensible car, cracked dad jokes, and offered a warm smile. But Marcus carried secrets his wife and kids knew little about, secrets he'd buried when he chose a peaceful existence over a stormy past. It was a midweek afternoon when Marcus, his wife Linda, and their teenage kids Ethan and Sophie pulled off the highway to refuel. They were on a long road trip, hoping to visit Linda's old friend in another state. The family car was stuffed with bags of snacks, bottled water, and a soft cooler that rattled whenever Marcus braked. Ethan sat in the back, while Sophie listened to music through oversized headphones. Linda offered Marcus a reassuring smile as he parked near the pump. She knew he disliked driving for too long, even though he rarely complained. Marcus got out, stretched his back, and looked at the gas station. It was a small place attached to a diner, seemingly quiet except for two other vehicles parked out front. He glanced around, feeling the swirl of warm air. Ethan and Sophie hopped out as well. Ethan mumbled something about needing the restroom, and Sophie mentioned grabbing a soda. Linda joined them, leaving Marcus to handle the refueling. He didn't mind. It gave him a moment of silence. As he filled the tank, his thoughts drifted to the life he'd led before Linda, a world of leather jackets, late-night meetings, and tensions that never fully disappeared. Suddenly, the thunderous roar of motorcycles broke the calm. A group of 6 bikers rolled into the lot, their engines echoing like a challenge. Marcus felt a faint clench in his chest, an instinctive reaction he couldn't quite squash. Though bikers weren't always dangerous, he'd seen his share of trouble in the past. He remembered a time when he would have judged their patches and markings, tested their willingness to fight. Now he simply wanted to avoid trouble. The bikers parked in a neat line, each rider shutting off the engine in turn. They peeled off their helmets, talking loudly amongst themselves. One had a greasy mustache, another was burly and tattooed, and a third carried a smug grin that made Marcus's stomach tighten. Marcus finished pumping gas, hoping they would pay him no mind. Linda and the kids returned just as the bikers walked toward the diner. "Let's get going," Linda whispered, noticing Marcus's anxious look. He nodded, slid behind the wheel, and started the car. Ethan and Sophie buckled up, oblivious to his sudden tension. Before he could reverse, the biker with the greasy mustache swaggered close to the passenger window. He caught Marcus's eye, flashed a cruel grin, and slapped the side mirror. The mirror rattled but didn't break, and the biker let out a low laugh. Marcus froze, both hands gripping the steering wheel. A younger version of him might have jumped out and done something he'd regret. But now, he had his family to think about. "Dad, just drive," Ethan murmured. Sophie lowered her headphones and stared, confused by the biker's behavior. Marcus inched the car backward, trying to give the group a wide berth. The mustache biker moved away, but not before letting out a sharp whistle. Another biker, tall and lean, blocked Marcus's path. He smirked as if daring Marcus to do something. Marcus's heart pounded. He remembered the code he once lived by, never show weakness. Gritting his teeth, Marcus rolled down his window slightly. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice calm. "We're just leaving." "And what if we don't want you to leave?" the tall biker taunted, flicking his eyes toward Linda and the kids. "You in some kind of hurry, big man?" Marcus felt the old anger stir. He forced it down, thinking of his children. "We're not looking for trouble." The mustache biker circled behind the car, then kicked the rear tire. Linda gasped quietly. Marcus clenched the wheel harder. He wanted to keep the peace, but each insult chipped away at his composure. He had spent years trying to bury the man he used to be. Another biker joined the first two, eyeing Linda and Sophie. "Look at this family road trip," he sneered. "We got ourselves a big guy, a couple of kiddos, maybe we should collect a fee for passing through." A wave of protective fury washed over Marcus, but he refused to show it. "I don't have much cash on me," he replied, voice steady. "That's so?" the mustached biker asked. He put his hand out. "Let's see what you got." Linda stared at Marcus, her face pale. Ethan and Sophie were tense in the back seat. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed over what little money he had. The mustached biker snatched it, flipped through the bills, and let out a harsh laugh. "You carry pocket change. Next time, bring enough for the toll." He tossed the wallet onto the ground, forcing Marcus to open the door and pick it up. Marcus felt all eyes on him as he bent down. Painful memories of intimidation tactics from his old life flashed before him. He stood upright, tried to level his gaze, and said, "Can we go now?" The bikers exchanged smirks. One of them fiddled with the side mirror again, leaving a scratch. Marcus told himself to stay calm. He motioned to Linda, and she reached for her phone, but Marcus shook his head almost imperceptibly. Calling the police might escalate things, and that was the last thing he wanted. After a tense moment, the tall biker stepped aside, waving a hand as though granting permission. The group walked off, still chuckling, as Marcus eased the car into reverse. He pulled away with measured care, not wanting to provoke them. Back on the highway, the tension inside the car simmered like a pot about to boil over. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, while Linda shifted in the passenger seat, glancing his way. She could sense his frustration, yet she also saw the guilt in his eyes. He'd told her a long time ago about his younger years, how he'd walked away from a dangerous life to start fresh. In the back seat, Ethan still looked upset. Every so often, he opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Sophie kept her headphones on, staring out the window, her brow creased in anxious thought. Even the hum of the tires on the road seemed charged with unspoken tension. They drove like this for nearly an hour. Marcus barely said a word. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Dad," he said in a low voice, "why'd you just let those guys do that?" He glanced at Sophie, as if seeking backup. "They took your money and messed with the car. It's not fair." Marcus tightened his jaw. He couldn't deny it hurt to have his own son question his courage. "I know," he replied evenly. "But there were 6 of them, and I had you and your sister to worry about. Sometimes you have to pick your battles." Ethan sat back, unconvinced. "We can't just let people walk all over us. You taught me that, remember?" Those words cut deeper than Ethan realized. Marcus felt a memory surface, teaching a younger Ethan how to stand up to bullies in middle school. He told him not to start fights but not to run from them either. Now, Ethan was throwing it back at him, and Marcus had no easy comeback. Linda rested a comforting hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You did the right thing for us," she said quietly. "I'm grateful you kept everything calm." Ethan slumped, still frustrated. Sophie pulled down her headphones. "I just want to forget it," she said, voice trembling. "What if they follow us or something?" Marcus inhaled slowly, forcing down the concern that Sophie's words triggered. "They won't follow us," he insisted. "We're out of their territory now. Don't worry." But he wasn't entirely sure. A whisper in his gut warned him that men like those bikers wouldn't forget a perceived slight. It didn't matter that Marcus had tried to avoid a fight. In their minds, they might see him as prey, or worse, a challenge. The thought made him press the accelerator a bit harder. A half hour later, Linda spotted a billboard for a modest motel. "Let's stop there," she suggested. "It's getting late, and we could all use some rest." Marcus nodded. He took the exit and found a small, 2-story motel with a flickering neon sign. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in dull purples and oranges. They checked in without fuss, except for Ethan's grumbling about the outdated decor in the lobby. Marcus Kane lay on the stiff motel bed, staring at the textured ceiling. He tried closing his eyes but failed to find any comfort. Instead, he saw the jeering faces of the men who'd humiliated him in front of his family. A soft click announced Linda stepping out of the bathroom. She paused by the foot of the bed. "Can't sleep?" she whispered. He shook his head, careful not to disturb the kids. "My mind won't shut off." She climbed in next to him, resting a hand gently on his arm. What's bothering you the most? The bikers, or Ethan calling you out? Marcus paused. Both, he admitted. I feel like I let everyone down. But you know why I can't just start a fight, Linda finished for him. I know. And I'm glad you didn't. Our kids' safety matters more than pride. Her voice was soothing, but Marcus caught the flicker of concern in her eyes. She knew how he used to solve problems. He had tried to describe it years ago, how intimidation, force, and fear had once been part of his daily routine. He told her just enough to make sure she understood the stakes, but he'd never gone into full detail. It was a chapter of his life he'd locked away. Now that chapter was clawing at the lid. Marcus sighed heavily. I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Those guys, they're not the type to let things lie. If they figure out who I am, or if they run into us again. She inhaled slowly, weighing the possibility that the bikers could track them down. We'll be careful, she said. We'll avoid them. And if we see them again, we'll call the police. Marcus swallowed hard. There's something else. Something I haven't told you in detail. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I led a gang. The Iron Fangs. We controlled half the county back then. Linda's eyes widened. Even though she'd known he had ties to a criminal group, she'd never fully grasped the scale or his exact role. You were in charge? She whispered. He nodded, feeling the weight of the admission. I started as an enforcer, collecting debts, handling disputes. But eventually, I took over. We had territory, influence, and well, you can guess the rest. I walked away when I wanted a real life, a family. I just never expected the old ways would feel so close again. Linda exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. I suspected it was big. But you never talked much about it, so I just let it go. Now, though, it's coming back. Marcus clenched his jaw. I can't let our family be threatened. Not by those bikers or anyone else. Back in the day, if someone messed with us. He paused, eyes dark. We settled it. Fast. She stared at him, a mix of fear and trust in her eyes. If you think it's necessary, then do what you have to do. But promise me you won't hurt anyone unless there's no other choice. Marcus nodded, relief and anxiety mingling in his chest. I promise. He carefully slipped off the bed and grabbed his phone from the charger. Linda watched him cross the room to the corner, where he knelt, lowered his voice, and began tapping out a message. The phone number he entered was one he'd memorized years ago, a direct line to a man named Rico, his closest friend from the Iron Fangs days. Marcus hesitated before hitting send, aware that this single action could unravel everything he'd built. At first, there was silence. Then the phone buzzed. A text appeared, been a while, boss. Everything okay? Marcus's heart pounded. He typed back, need a favor. Possible trouble. Think you and the guys can meet me? A short pause, then a reply, name the time and place. He told Rico everything and asked if the crew could gather in a nearby city that was on the route home. Rico's response was immediate, we'll be there. Don't worry. Marcus ended the chat, feeling both unsettled and oddly comforted. Yes, he was tapping into a world he'd left behind, but it meant he wouldn't be alone if things escalated. He turned around to find Linda still watching him, her expression caught between acceptance and dread. She patted the spot next to her on the bed. Marcus returned and sat down, phone heavy in his hand. What happens now? She asked softly. Marcus exhaled. Now we continue our trip. We try to act normal. But if those bikers cross our path, or if we see any sign they're following us, I make a call. Rico and the others will be ready. Linda leaned her head on his shoulder. Marcus, I'm scared for you. For us. They didn't speak after that. The motel's air conditioning hummed as the minutes crawled by, each lost in thoughts of what the future might hold. Eventually, Marcus flicked off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Marcus Kane woke before sunrise, quietly leaving the hotel room so he wouldn't disturb Linda, Ethan, or Sophie. The air felt charged with the tension of unfinished business. He slipped into his car, checked his phone for updates from Rico, and drove to a nearby parking lot where his old crew waited. They were men he'd once led under the Iron Fang's name, back when a single call from him could change the balance of power in entire neighborhoods. Rico greeted him with a curt nod. "Morning, boss," he said, handing Marcus a small folder filled with notes and photos. "We've pinned down the bikers' operations. They dabble in smuggling, run a garage for stolen parts, and collect protection fees at a local bar. We've spent the night gathering evidence." Marcus flipped through the folder quickly, his mind already devising a plan. "Let's hurt them in every way we can, without drawing our own blood. No direct confrontation unless there's no other choice." Rico grinned, clearly relishing the return of Marcus's strategic edge. "We've got it all mapped out," he said. "Ready when you are." Marcus started by tipping off the cops about the bikers' smuggling routes. Through Rico's late-night surveillance, they'd learned the bikers moved contraband, everything from stolen electronics to cheap firearms, along certain backroads. Marcus knew exactly which cops were open to an anonymous tip, so he made the calls without leaving a trace of his own identity. That same afternoon, law enforcement intercepted 2 vans carrying the bikers' cargo. Word spread fast. The bikers lost a fortune in goods, and a few of their low-level associates ended up in custody. Vince, their greasy-mustached leader, soon found out they'd been hit. He was furious. The crew held a brief meeting at their makeshift hideout, a rundown motel, and concluded there must be an informant in their midst. "Somebody squealed," Vince reportedly raged, according to one of Rico's well-placed lookouts. "We're shutting this operation down until we find out who." Marcus grinned when he heard the news. Even if Vince suspected a traitor, he wouldn't know where to look, creating chaos within their ranks. Next, Marcus targeted the bikers' garage, the core of their money-making. They salvaged stolen motorcycle parts and sold them at a discount, undercutting legitimate shops. By bribing a few suppliers, Marcus ensured that every order the bikers placed for new tires, engines, or parts suddenly got lost in transit. Deliveries were cancelled, and the bikers found themselves unable to restock. Rico made anonymous calls to potential customers, warning them the bikers were under investigation. Word spread among local riders that the garage wasn't safe to use. Soon, Vince's phone was ringing nonstop with angry clients demanding refunds or complaining about missed orders. The disgruntled looks on the bikers' faces only fueled their paranoia. Everywhere they turned, deals fell through, and trust eroded. Marcus's favorite move came under the cover of darkness. While Vince and his main crew drowned their sorrows at a late-night bar, Rico and 2 of Marcus's men slipped into the bikers' garage. Using small tools and insider know-how, they disabled the bikes in subtle ways, loosening bolts, draining oil, and planting tiny trackers in hidden crevices. The next morning, when the bikers tried to ride out, they discovered a range of problems, from squealing brakes to engines sputtering after a few blocks. Some bikes wouldn't start at all. Vince swore up and down that they had a rat in the group. Suspicion tore through the ranks. Arguments flared over who had locked up last, who had the keys, and who wasn't careful enough. Rico relayed these developments to Marcus with a wide grin. "They're too busy fighting each other to figure out what's really happening," Marcus simply replied. "Good. Let's keep it that way." The planted trackers also gave Marcus and his crew a real-time look at where the bikes traveled. If the bikers attempted to move contraband or find new business partners, Marcus would know. Combined with the police raids and supply issues, the Sabotage forced Vince's gang into a constant state of emergency, never knowing who or what would fail them next. To top it all off, Marcus arranged anonymous reports to the local authorities about health and safety violations at both the bikers' bar and their garage. By forging some photos and forging paperwork that hinted at dangerous conditions, he ensured quick inspections. The unsuspecting city officials arrived with clipboards, turning everything upside down. At the bar, the health inspector cited them for rodent droppings and expired liquor. The place was slapped with a temporary shutdown notice pending reinspection, immediately cutting off a steady flow of cash. At the garage, code enforcement officials discovered faulty wiring and hazardous waste disposal issues. The local government forced them to halt operations until repairs were made. Watching from a distance, Marcus felt a small pang of nostalgia. In his younger days, he'd never have gone about it this way. He might have confronted them head-on. But now, he realized how much more devastating it was to unravel them systematically. They had no targets to punch back at because they didn't know who pulled the strings. Vince and his men, used to controlling others through intimidation, found themselves at the mercy of faceless officials and secret informants. In the span of a few days, the bikers lost shipments, lost customers, had their bikes sabotaged, and endured shutdown orders. Rumors of a traitor crept through their ranks. Each member eyed the others with distrust, convinced someone was feeding intel to the cops or outside forces. Vince tried to maintain control, shouting orders and threatening anyone who questioned him. But the cracks were impossible to hide. Some of the newer recruits packed up and left town, fearing they'd be next in line for arrest. Others demanded answers Vince couldn't provide. The entire operation teetered on collapse. Marcus kept tabs on them using Rico's network of contacts, waitresses, motel clerks, even a sympathetic mechanic who disliked Vince's crew and shared rumors freely. Every piece of information confirmed the same truth: the bikers were in full retreat mode, unsure where the next blow would come from. Sitting in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, Marcus updated Linda via careful hints. He didn't share all the details, but enough so she understood they were no longer being threatened. She looked both relieved and uneasy. "So, you're not actually fighting them," she said, choosing her words. "Not physically," Marcus clarified. "They won't have the chance. By the time we're done, they'll have no choice but to leave." Linda exhaled. "Just be careful." She wanted to ask more but decided not to, trusting him while remaining nervous about the lengths he might go to. Although the bikers had once seemed unstoppable, their power crumbled under a series of hits they couldn't trace. Marcus was thorough: one phone call to City Hall here, one bribe to a parts distributor there, and a quiet whisper to a local cop who already had a vendetta against crooks like Vince. Bit by bit, the bikers' foundation eroded. By the end of the week, Vince and his closest men were saddled with fines, potential criminal charges, broken down bikes, and zero faith in one another. In desperate meetings, they hurled accusations, stormed off, or punched walls in anger. They couldn't figure out how everything went wrong so quickly. Marcus Kane sat in his parked car, the engine idling softly. He stared at the phone in his hand, heart pounding with a restless mix of relief and anticipation. A message from Rico glowed on the screen. "Vince and his crew are holed up at the Riverside Motel. They're planning to skip town tonight." That much, Marcus expected. For days, he and his old allies had systematically dismantled the bikers' business, from police raids to supply cancellations to hidden sabotage. Yet Vince, the greasy mustache biker who once mocked Marcus at the gas station, had no idea that the fat bald guy he humiliated was the one orchestrating his downfall. Marcus had kept his involvement deeply secret, letting the bikers blame a traitor in their own ranks or random bad luck. Now Vince was on the verge of fleeing, clueless about who had pulled the strings. Part of Marcus wanted to leave it that way, to let Vince slink off, never the wiser. But another part yearned for closure. He wanted Vince to see, face to face, the man who'd orchestrated his ruin, and know exactly why he'd done it. He put the car in drive and pulled away from the deserted side street, heading for the motel Rico had scouted. In a dusty parking lot a few blocks from the Riverside Motel, Marcus spotted Rico's car. 3 figures stood nearby, Rico and 2 other old Iron Fang's allies. Marcus parked and got out, giving Rico a firm handshake. "Thanks for the text." Rico nodded, voice low. "They're loading up a van and a couple of bikes. From what we hear, Vince is frantic to leave. He still thinks someone in his own crew sold him out." Marcus exhaled. "He has no idea it was us." "Not a clue," Rico agreed. "At least that's what he's been raging about. He told the guys he won't forget this betrayal." Despite the grim humor, Marcus's conscience twisted. He had done what was needed to keep his family safe, and it was undeniably satisfying to watch Vince's operation collapse. But the old part of him that once thrived on fear felt too close for comfort. "Listen up," Marcus said, turning to face the small group. "I need to confront Vince. I want him to know who's behind this. But I don't plan on violence. We'll handle it if he tries anything, but I want him gone for good, understanding that he messed with the wrong family." Rico's gaze flickered with interest. "You sure you want to reveal yourself?" Marcus nodded slowly. "He's humiliated me in front of my wife and kids, threatened them. I won't feel settled until he looks me in the eye and realizes I was the one who tore his empire down. After that, he's free to leave forever." The three men exchanged glances, then each gave a nod of understanding. They all respected Marcus's decision. Once, he had been their leader in the Iron Fangs, known for his blend of cunning and loyalty. That reputation still held weight. They drove in 2 cars toward the Riverside Motel, a rundown, single-story complex near an abandoned industrial area. A pair of motorcycles leaned on their stands nearby, while figures moved in and out of a grimy motel room, hauling boxes and duffel bags. Marcus parked at a distance. Marcus squared his shoulders, letting a spark of his old commanding presence emerge. He was no longer just a mild father from the gas station. He was the man who had once led the Iron Fangs. They approached slowly, boots crunching on the cracked asphalt. As they neared the motel room, Vince stepped out, carrying a ragged cardboard box of bike parts. He froze mid-stride, eyeing the approaching men with immediate suspicion. Behind him, 2 of his crew followed, each lugging overstuffed backpacks. Vince didn't recognize Rico, just another unknown face to him, but he could tell these strangers were here with a purpose. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped, setting the box down in a hurry. Marcus and Rico exchanged a glance. Marcus stepped forward, gaze fixed on the battered van and the anxious scowls of Vince's men. Their operation was obviously in shambles. "Perfect." Rico kept his voice calm. "We're the ones who ruined your business. The reason you can't get parts, can't dodge the cops, and keep running into mysterious setbacks. You've been looking for a traitor in your own crew, but you were wrong." Vince's eyes narrowed, trying to place these men. "What's that supposed to mean?" he growled. "I've never seen you in my life." Rico's mouth twitched in a grim smile, but he inclined his head toward Marcus. "Maybe you've never seen me, but you've definitely seen him." Only then did Vince focus fully on Marcus, heavy-set, bald, yet standing with a confidence that didn't match his unassuming look. Vince scrutinized the man's face, his posture, and suddenly, something clicked. Realization flashed in his eyes. "It's you," Vince muttered, shock mingling with fury. "You're that fat, bald guy from the gas station." Marcus nodded, his tone level. "That's right. The one you humiliated in front of my wife and kids. The one you threatened like an easy mark." Vince snorted, still not piecing it all together. "So what if we did?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, pulling up his shirt sleeve. Underneath was an old tattoo, a snarling wolf's head with stylized fangs. A relic of his Iron Fangs days. Behind Vince, one of the bikers murmured in surprise, "Iron Fangs?" A flicker of confusion danced in Vince's eyes. He still didn't fully comprehend. "Iron Fangs? I heard rumors about them. Didn't know they were still around. But that doesn't tell me who you are." Marcus exhaled slowly, leveling a stare at Vince. "I was the leader of Iron Fangs." At this, Vince's jaw clenched in outrage and disbelief. He took an aggressive step forward, but Rico and another ally casually positioned themselves to block him. The other bikers hesitated, uncertain if they should jump in. "You destroyed everything!" Vince spat, voice shaking. "All those shipments seized, our suppliers ghosting us, that was you?" Marcus nodded. "That was me, and my friends. You took my wallet and phone. You keyed my car. You talked about my wife as if she were up for grabs." His voice dropped, full of an edge Vince hadn't heard before. "Now you see how it feels when someone decides to tear apart everything you built." A hush fell. Vince looked at his men, who seemed rattled. No wonder they hadn't found the traitor. The threat had been external the whole time, an invisible hand pulling every string. Vince's shoulders rose and fell with rapid breaths. Marcus could practically taste the rage radiating off him. Vince glowered, fists balled. "You think this is over? I can start fresh in another town. Build up my crew again. Then I'll find you." Marcus replied quietly. "I'll make sure wherever you go, you fail. Because if you threaten me or my family again, if you so much as look in our direction, I'll come back twice as hard." One of Vince's men raised his voice. "We never knew it was you. Why not just come at us head on?" "Because I don't need to brawl in the streets to win," Marcus answered. "I'm not here to prove how tough I am. I just want my family safe. Hurting you physically won't give me that security, ruining your business does. Now you have no foothold here. Get in your van, ride out of town, and don't come back." Vince sneered, scowling at Marcus's gut as if searching for a reason to dismiss him. "You're nothing special, just some middle-aged dad who got lucky." Marcus felt an old spark of anger but kept it locked down. "Call it whatever you want. The fact is, I beat you." Vince's glare could have melted steel. Marcus half expected him to lunge, but the bikers behind Vince looked exhausted, demoralized. They'd been living in suspicion and chaos for days. They had no fight left, certainly not enough to take on Marcus's well-prepared crew. Sensing the standoff would only escalate if given time, Marcus stepped forward, so close that Vince could smell his aftershave. "Here's the deal. You leave. Right now. And if I ever see your face or hear of you harassing anyone else I care about, I'll finish what I started in a way you won't walk away from. Understand?" Vince glowered, chest heaving. Silence stretched for a taut moment. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine. You want us gone? We're gone." He turned to his men, gesturing sharply. They picked up their scattered belongings, bags of clothes, boxes of dubious merchandise. No one said a word. With furious, deliberate motions, Vince slammed the van's rear doors. The engine rumbled to life. Two of the bikers wheeled their motorcycles alongside. Vince gave Marcus one last hateful look before spitting on the ground. Then he climbed into the driver's seat. The bikers pulled out, tires crunching gravel, engines droning into the distance. Marcus watched them go with a sense of finality. Part of him expected to feel triumphant, but mostly he just felt tired. Rico and the others waited until the van disappeared around the corner before letting out quiet sighs of relief. One of them clapped Marcus on the back. "Well done, boss. No blood spilled, and they're gone for good." Marcus nodded, exhaling slowly. "Let's hope they stay gone." He thanked them for their help. They traded a few more words, and Marcus assured them he'd stay in touch, though, he admitted to himself, he hoped he wouldn't need their help like this again. As they parted ways, Marcus slid back into his car, leaning his head against the headrest. For a moment, he just breathed. He thought of Linda, Ethan, and Sophie waiting at the hotel. He'd have to explain that he confronted Vince one last time. Would they approve of his decision to show himself, to confirm he was the one behind the sabotage? Maybe not entirely, but it was something he needed for closure. By the time Marcus arrived at the hotel, the sun had dropped low in the sky, painting the horizon with shades of orange and purple. He stepped inside the small lobby, nodded at the receptionist, and made his way to the room. Linda opened the door at his knock, her expression a blend of worry and hope. "It's over," he told her gently, stepping into the room. Ethan and Sophie appeared from the adjoining space, each wearing the same anxious look. "What do you mean, over?" Ethan asked, folding his arms. "Did you see those guys?" Marcus nodded, motioning for them to sit down. He sank into a chair, resting his forearms on his knees. "I met them face to face. Vince, he was the one in charge, knows I'm the reason his business collapsed. They're leaving town." Sophie let out a tense breath. "They didn't try to fight?" "Not this time," Marcus said. "They realized how badly things turned against them." Linda moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "And you're okay?" "Yeah. He murmured, nodding. It ended without a brawl. They're out of our hair. A brief silence settled. Ethan eyed his father, seeming torn between pride and concern. Marcus met his son's gaze. I wanted him to know. Because if he ever tries to come after us again, he'll remember that I don't fight fair. I fight smart. Ethan's expression softened, perhaps remembering how he'd once called his dad a coward. Now he saw how cunning Marcus had been from the start, protecting them without turning the trip into a battlefield. Sophie lowered her voice. Will he come after us later? Marcus thought about Vince's hateful glare. He might think about it. But he has no resources left here, no network. He'll have to rebuild somewhere else, and we'll be long gone by then. If he does try, I'll be ready. Linda, her eyes filled with both relief and lingering anxiety, slid her hand into his. I'm just glad we're safe. I hope this is the last time you have to do something like this. He gently squeezed her fingers. I hope so too. Early the next morning, they checked out of the hotel, loaded the car, and started the final leg home. The atmosphere felt lighter than it had in days. Ethan scrolled through his phone, Sophie hummed along to her music, and Linda occasionally glanced at Marcus, offering a grateful smile. Marcus drove with a steady calm, turning over recent events in his mind. He'd proven that he didn't need to revert to the raw violence of his gang days. He could outthink opponents and protect his loved ones without turning into the man he once was. Yet a small corner of his soul still buzzed with the knowledge that he'd let Vince see his true power. For better or worse, that side of him remained a part of who he was. They arrived home late in the afternoon, stepping into the cozy comfort of their suburban house. Linda exhaled a sigh of gratitude. Ethan declared he was starving, and Sophie beelined for her room to finally have some space. Marcus lingered in the living room, gazing at the familiar walls and family photos. His phone buzzed. A text from Rico. Bikers are out of the county. No signs they're doubling back. Stay safe, boss. Marcus typed a quick reply. Thanks for everything. I owe you. Then set his phone down. As he turned around, Linda was watching him from the kitchen doorway. Everything good? She asked quietly. He nodded. We're safe. They left. She walked over, wrapped her arms around him in a warm hug, and breathed against his chest. Thank you, she whispered, for protecting us, and for doing it without dragging us into a worse mess. Marcus returned the embrace, resting his chin on top of her head. I'd do anything to keep you all safe. I just hope that's the last time I'll need those old tricks. Linda pulled back, offering him a soft smile. Me too. They joined Ethan and Sophie in the kitchen for a simple dinner, pizza delivery and a soda for each of them. Conversation flowed between jokes about the road trip and relieved talk about getting back to normal life. Every so often, Marcus caught Ethan eyeing him with a new kind of respect. Sophie, meanwhile, clung to her dad's side a bit more often than before, as if reassured by his presence. The biker's downfall served as a lesson to anyone else who might consider harming the people he loved. No one would ever underestimate the fat, bald guy. Again, especially not once they realized that behind his ordinary facade lay the steel backbone of a man who could dismantle entire empires with a few well-placed phone calls.